Hi, and this is just some guy talking about Doctor Who, because why not? We live in an ideological concept in which one can do whatever they want, and this is me doing whatever I want, so screw you if you don't like me doing this. This week I'm talking about The War Games by Terrence and Michael Hulke, and my god, is this story amazing. It's a 10-part epic story, and if you don't count Trial of Time, well, it's the second longest story in Doctor Who, and it's, 250 minutes, which is 4 hours 10. It took me about 2 weeks to watch this because I watched it bit by bit. I didn't just watch it in one go, so I had time to process it for this review. But it took me about 2 weeks watching 1 or 2 a day. But it took me that long. It's such a long story. But the reason for this was that they had 2 stories planned in this slot, a 6-parter and a 4-parter, which makes up 10. But the scripts weren't accepted for whatever reason. There was problems with them. I don't know. No one really knows what was going to happen here. So they went to Terrence. I don't know if he was script editor yet. And he wrote the War Games as a single 10-part unit. And he admits that what he essentially did was just what writers do when they need to fill out time. They get captured, they escape, and then they get captured again. And you feel like you've had a full 25-minute episode when you're basically just back where you started. And they basically do this for about, 6 episodes worth of the story? And it just sort of goes in the cycle of a bit. So you've got episode 1, which is quite interesting. Episode 1, it was marketed in the Radio Times as a historical story. And you'd be right for thinking that it was. It's at the end of episode 2 when they find the Romans, and that's when you start to realise there's something sinister going on. Well, you know something sinister going on from episode 1, but I mean, you realise there's something sci-fi going on. Of course it's sci-fi, it's Doctor Who. You know that there is something different about the scenario happening, and then it all just sort of goes from there, and it's quite an interesting story. And considering it was 10 episodes, written rushed, very rushed, they just had to fill out time essentially, and that's basically what they had to do. Though if I were Dix, I'd have made this a 6-parter and then turned episode 10 into a 4-parter on its own, because episode 10 really, it's I'll get onto it. It should have been its own 4-parter. So with a story of this scale, where you've got all these different time zones and all these different characters, it's amazing that the supporting cast in this, it's really massive. You had Michael Troughton in there, well, this was Troughton's last story. Of course I'm going to get Michael in it, but of course he would show up in Doctor Who time and time again, Curse of Peladon, Midnight. But he wasn't the only cast member who's appeared in other Doctor Who things. There was the guy with the goatee. He was previously in the Crotons earlier that series. And I think Philip Maddock, the war chief, he went on to be the crazy scientist, the Frankenstein type guy in The Brain of Morbius. And that sort of lead Time Lord guy, he went on to be a Thal in Planet of the Daleks. So it's really amazing what they did for their supporting cast. But one who's quite significant is Jane Sherwin. And she was cast naturally. The casting agents were like, oh, what about Jane Sherwin for this role? And Derek Sherwin was like, oh yeah, let's get Jane in for this. Of course, to avoid any nepotism, he had to keep it. They had to keep it secret that they were actually married. And in fact, when they were doing the making of documentary for this, Fraser Hines and Randy Bradbury were like, oh, they've got the same surname. Maybe they were siblings. And so it's amazing that they kept it so secret that no one realised they were actually married. But then again, her character, Lady Jennifer, just sort of seems to disappear about halfway through and just doesn't turn up. You just wonder what exactly happened to her. She gets mentioned, but she just seems to disappear after that point. But of course, being a historical with all these characters, it's had the budget of 2 serials, so that's how they're able to have both the wartime and the sci-fi place thing, I don't know what to refer to it as. It was the something zone. They had enough budget to do that, and boy did they do that. But all the costumes, because it's the BBC, they can just reuse costumes. They do wartime dramas all the time. They can just get costumes from the wardrobe department. That's why historically based Doctor Who stories tend to be the ones with much better production design, because they can just reuse other sets and costumes. For this, they didn't reuse sets. They actually were built the trenches and the Civil War shed. But something that was reused was the battlefield for the World War I zone, because there was a film, can't remember what it was called, some War film that was filmed in a landfill out in, I think it was Bristol. Yeah, Bristol. And so they just went along, and it was literally, they just left the barbed wire and all that out, so they were just able to just reuse it. So apparently it stank to blazes, but you know, at least you're getting a free set out of it, and they used it quite a bit, but apparently it stank. But there was one point where they're supposed to duck and cover, and then a bomb goes off in front of them. And Patrick Troughton was like, well, can we just, you know, do a practice run of this and then have us in there? Because Troughton was just afraid that he was going to get hit with shrapnel or whatever. And the pyrotechnic guys are like, oh no, it's fine. Do you know how long it would take us to reset this? Let's just do it. And Troughton's like, no. Let's do it first and then actually do it. Because he refused, they just did it. And when they did, a big boulder flew up in the air and landed right where they were supposed to be. And Troughton was like, see, told you that would happen. So you could have ended up with the 3 main cast members getting killed there. But apparently also, when there were explosions going off, Troughton refused to be in the ambulance, which wasn't actually like a mock ambulance or anything with modern engines. It was a genuine old ambulance with the old gearbox and everything, and of course with the pedals the other way around. You know, it's the BBC. They can just do historicals. They're great at that. I mean, look at the BBC scheduling right now. You'll have something like Someone's War, in like Pride and Prejudice. They do that stuff all the time. You can get historical costumes out of the BBC easily. The costumes that were interesting were the guards, who seem to all be wearing these sexy gimp suits. I mean, just look at that gimp suit. I mean, come on, that's something that someone would be wearing in a sex dungeon, let's be real. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting use of sets and costumes and all that in this. Though, of course, being the last story of the 60s, it was the last one to be in black and white, with Spearhead from Space being filmed in colour and HD, but that's Spearhead and Space video. It was the last one to be filmed in black and white, but in the control place, they used a lot of 60s pop art with the red spiral and the guillotine door. A lot of that was 60s inspired, and for it being the last one in the 60s, it's kind of appropriate. It is practically the only time they used 60s fashion in Doctor Who. So when Terrence wrote this, he was under the impression that it would be the last Doctor Who. He's thinking he was writing the finale essentially. And you can see why he thought this, because episode 8 had the lowest viewing figures in the show's history up until 1986's Trial of a Time Lord. It was that episode 8 there. And which is weird, because episode 8 was the first ever time that the word Time Lord is used in Doctor Who. Though in episode 8 it's used in a throwaway line, oh, we both ran away from the Time Lords. But it is in episode 9 when it's like my people are coming. Who are your people? The Time Lords. That's when it sort of got announced to the public, this is what my species are. And you can see Terrence Dicks writing this as a finale, because bringing the Time Lords in was kind of a finale to the Troughton era is how it's considered, but it could have been the finale to this whole show. Luckily it wasn't, but you can see why they'd have thought that, and obviously wrote it like that, because when the Time Lords came in, it was like, to quote Phil Cornell, it was like the hand of God coming in, just slowing down time, an inescapable force. The TARDIS, which is seen as this magical entity in the show, just can't escape them. They're so powerful. And in episode 10, it's just, you see the Time Lords and you're like, wow, these guys are powerful. And it's not like menacing power like, I am Omega, I am Rassilon. They're just powerful in the sense of that they just casually dematerialise a guy and make it as if he never existed. And they're so powerful and well performed. They're just like godlike entities. And that's just the Time Lords. And that's how they introduce, and that's when people kind of annoyed later on when you got to the Deadly Assassin, but that's for another video. But of course, when Troughton regenerated, when they did the courtroom scene, they already had John Pertwee cast as the third Doctor, but when Troughton was doing his no, doing that, they hadn't cast Pertwee, and that's why you don't actually see Troughton morph into him. And when the discontinuity guide was written in either the 90s, it picked up on this and created what is known as the Season 6B theory. And this theory is that this wasn't actually when Troughton regenerated, that he actually had a few more adventures after this, and then later regenerated to Pertwee at some point. It's sort of like in a mid-regenerative state. And this has led to various non-canonical, there's no canon to Doctor Who, but you get what I mean, spin-off, etc. The audio set in this. It's believed that the 3 Doctors and the 5 Doctors might have been doing this because how else does Troughton know about Jamie and Zoe getting their minds wiped in the 5 Doctors? And also, of course, the fan film Devious, which is interesting because Devious, which was made in 1994, 96, can't remember, was actually the last time that John Pertwee ever played the 3rd Doctor, because he had just come from a back operation, and a few weeks later that's what killed him. So that's why Devious was featured on the War Games DVD. So it's the Season 6B, it's just a theory, it's not anything official, but it's post-Troughton, well, sort of during Troughton's regeneration, really. But that isn't the most heartbreaking thing about episode 10. Jamie and Zoe's departure, oh my god, it was... They tried to fight, it's what they did, and you could have made 4 episodes and just trying to escape the Time Lords, but of course, they're gods. You can't escape them, and they try, and the Doctor knows that there's no escaping them, but he just humours them, essentially. Oh, come on, Doctor, we've got out of things like this before. Okay, Jamie, let's go, but we'll have to be quick. And he knows that they're not going to escape, and he's just leading them back to where they're going to depart from. It's one last adventure, really, and it's such a small adventure, but they try, and then when they're caught, they just go. And it has the first ever time that the Doctor kisses a companion, though it's in a platonic sense, not in a sexual nature like it is in the modern era. And they just get into the TARDIS, wave goodbye, and then get all but their first adventure swiped from their memories. And Zoe's last line,
yes.
oh, I forgot something, but it's nothing important. It's just so heartbreaking, not breaking, but warming, but just seeing that. I mean, because of course when I saw the War Games, I'd already seen other ones of their stories and knew they were departing and all that. But at the time, it must have just because I mean, Fraser Hines had been in the show almost as long as Patrick Troughton. All but one of Troughton's stories had Jamie in it, and they're so bonded together. I mean, Fraser Hines does the voice of the 2nd Doctor in the Big Finish audios. That's how close they were to each other, and it's the end of just the whole era of the show, because of course after the Doctor's exiled to Earth at the end of episode 10, and that sort of started the Pertwee style era of the show, and it's very straight division in sort of like people's minds, because it's black and white and colour, 60s and 70s, missing episodes, surviving episodes. There's a very clear cut between the War Games and Spearhead from Space. At the time there wouldn't have been, because people were just watching on the TV with just a new Doctor, but nowadays looking back at it, there was a very, very strong division between the two eras. So the War Games is sort of like the climactic ending to 60s Doctor Who. And of course we're lucky to have it. When they did the original audit of the BBC archives in 1978, when they only had 47 episodes surviving, the War Games had episodes 2, 5, 8 and 9. The reason we have the other 6 episodes is because the BFI had kept copies of some episodes as a record of 60s sci-fi television, and they kept, I think it was all 5 episodes of The Dominators, 6 of The Seeds of Death, and 10 of the War Games, I think. And I think maybe the Croutons, I can't remember. But it was because of the BFI that we have this surviving. And if I was a BFI, I'd say, yeah, the War Games should be preserved. Why they didn't preserve the Daleks' master plan, I don't know, but they did, and they preserved the Croutons and the Dominators, because why not? But episode 10 in the story definitely should have been. It's amazing that we have it. If we didn't have episode 10, it would be the most sought after episode. I doubt, because people say 10th Planet's the most sought after episode. I think the War Games would, because whilst it's not the first regeneration, it's the first on-screen appearance of the Time Lords, and sees the departure of 2 companions. Episode 10, it could have been its own 4-part story. So the War Games, it's some people say it's a bit overly long, and I could get your point. It did take me 2 weeks to watch this. It's a bit of a just grueling experience to get through. It's 4 hours 10 minutes, and the longest film I can think of is, I think, Gone with the Wind, and it's like 2 hours 50, something like that. And I saw recently Once Upon a Time in America, and that's about 2 hours 40. And you sort of have to have a break in a bit. And I mean, with this, it's made up of 25-minute episodes, so you can just go and have a break at the end of each one. But it's such watching it as a whole, and I have done this quite often. I usually watch Doctor Who classic serials as a whole. I rarely watch them individually. I only do it for these so I can take notes of it. But I've done it many times before, and I must say it is just it's difficult to get through. And I think the reason why the viewing figures just dropped off and plummeted by episode 8. I think they picked up in 9 and 10 purely because people were like, Jesus Christ, we're about to meet the Doctor's own people. It's so long, I think people just thought, because of course at the time the viewership was dependent on the weather and sports events and things like that. So if you missed one episode or get an episode, I can't see how you're supposed to pick up after that. I just don't get how 60s television works. I wasn't alive at the time, but I can imagine people being like, oh, I've missed 3 episodes of this, I can't follow what's going on, I'm not just going to bother tuning in from that one. You know, the show goes on. It was voted the best Troughton story in the 2014 DWM poll. I don't think it's the best Troughton story. It's a very good story and one of the best ones out of the 60s Doctor Who. But you've got Web of Fear, you've got The Invasion, got Tomb of the Cybermen. I would put this in the top 5, but I wouldn't say this is the best Troughton story. And it's a bit overlong, but the director, and I cannot for the life of me remember his name, he managed to keep it, for 10 episodes of, as Terrence Dick said, just getting captured and escaping captions, just trying to fill out time basically. They managed to just keep it fast paced for 10 episodes, and that's very difficult, because I mean you get some films which are an hour and a half, and those feel like, they're a bit long, they've been overdone. But this is 4 hours and 10 minutes of not quite edge of your seat, but engaging television. And it's just an amazing story that's able to do that for 10 episodes. And it is an epic. I believe that each Doctor should have their behemoth story. The first Doctor was the Daleks' master plan. Second Doctor is the War Games. Fourth Doctor would be Genesis. Fifth Doctor would be Caves. Sixth Doctor would have to be Trial of a Time Lord. Ninth Doctor, Bad Wolf Parting Wraiths. Each Doctor has to have their big story basically. You can't have a Doctor go their entire run without having any story that you think, yes, that is the definitive of that Doctor. It's the big story that Doctor did and will always be their best. So that's me getting distracted, isn't it? The War Games is an amazing story, and I'm going to rate it now. I'm going to rate it 1 score for every episode in it. So yeah, it's a 10 out of 10. Of course it's a 10 out of 10. It's the freaking War Games. So what am I doing next week? I am doing Planet of the Ood, which is series 4, so I am looking forward to this one.